Hey, welcome to Draft Academy. My name is Mike. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about using functions in JavaScript. Now, a function is basically just a little block of code that's designed to perform a specific task. So I can take a bunch of lines of code inside of JavaScript, put them inside of a JavaScript function, and then I can call that function and use whatever the code inside of that function is doing to perform a specific task. So in this tutorial, I want to show you guys how to create functions. We're going to talk about giving functions different information, and then we'll talk about how functions can give us information when they're done running. So I'm going to create a function down here, and let's just say we want to create a very simple function which will say hi to the person writing the JavaScript. So I can create a function by typing out the function keyword. So I can type function. And now I want to give this function a name. So I want to name this function. And I'm just going to call this say hi. And once you've typed out the function name, then you need to type an open and closed parentheses and then an open and closed curly bracket. And then inside of this open and closed curly bracket, what we can do is we can start writing code for our function. And in our case, why don't we have this function just print something out onto the screen? So I can say document.write. And inside of here, I can just put any HTML that I want to write out to the page. So why don't we put in header 1, and I can say hello user, and there we go. Or let's say hello to me. So we'll say hello Mike. So now whenever I execute this function, what it's going to do is it's going to print out this header 1 that says hello Mike onto the screen. And so I can actually access this function by calling it. So I'm going to go down below this function, and when I want to access a function, in other words, when I want to call a function and use all of the code inside of here, I can just type out the name of the function. So I can just type say hi and then open and closed parentheses. So now what's going to happen is this will get printed out onto the screen. So you'll see that it prints out hello Mike as a header. So that's like pretty cool. It works really well. And if I wanted, I could change this. So I could say like hello Tom, and it'll change that. Or if I wanted, I could even add in more code to this function. So obviously this is a really simple function, but I could also put like an alert inside of here, and I could alert out something. I could say like hey, and so now when I run this function, it's going to do this alert, and it's also going to print out hello Tom. So this is a very basic function, and really you can put any code inside of here that you want. Any valid JavaScript code is going to work. So if I wanted, I could even create something like a variable. So I could say variable name is equal to, and I could set this equal to like Joe. And now instead of printing out Tom, what I can print out is the variable name. So I can use this plus sign, and I can actually put inside of here the name variable. So see what I'm doing here is I'm actually writing out part of a string, and then I'm concatenating onto that string the value inside of this name variable, and then I'm concatenating onto that this other h1 tag. And so what should happen now is it should use this variable name inside of this statement. So it should say hello Joe, which it does. So if I was to change Joe to like Steve, then it's going to change as well. So this is a basic function, and again, you can use variables, you can use really whatever you want inside of these functions, but you can also take these functions a step further. So I can like supercharge these functions, and I can actually give these functions specific information. So imagine that instead of just defining this Steve variable right here, this name variable, imagine if I wanted to tell the function which name I wanted it to say hi to. Well, to do that, I can actually pass in something called a parameter. And a parameter is basically a variable that you're giving to, it's a variable or a value that you're giving to the function. So I can get rid of this var name, and instead what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say up here, I'm going to say name. So instead of creating a variable called name, I'm just going to specify name up here. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell JavaScript that this function is going to take in a value. So in other words, when we call this function, when I specify name here, what this means is that I have to give this function a name. So if I didn't give this a name, so if I just said say hi right here, it'll say hello, but it'll say hello undefined, because we haven't actually given this function a name. If I come over here though and I pass in a name, so if I pass in like Mike, now instead of saying hello undefined, it's going to say hello Mike, because I'm passing this function, this say hi function, a parameter. I'm giving it a value, right? And I can specify which values I want to have passed into the function by just saying the name up here inside of this parentheses. So I can say name here, and that will automatically store the value that I pass in inside of this name. So if I wanted, then I could create another say hi. So we could say hi Mike and say hi Joe. And so now it'll say hello Mike, and it'll also say hello Joe. So you can see we're doing both of these. So I could call this function as many times as I want with as many names as I want. And because I'm passing it information, each time we execute that function, it's going to use a different value to do what it's supposed to do. So that's kind of how functions can be useful, and you can use parameters to pass different information in. I can also pass in multiple pieces of information. So in addition to a name, I could also pass in something like an age. So now below here, we can make another document.write, and we could write out, instead we could put like a paragraph, and we could say you are this age. And so now what it'll do is it'll print out, in addition to printing out hello and the name, it'll also tell me what age they are. So if I want to add in another parameter over here, all I have to do is just type a comma, and now I'll pass in a number. So I can say like 23 or something. And when I refresh the page, you'll see that it says, hello Joe, you are 23. And I can modify both of these values. So now I can make it say, hello Mike, you are 23. And I can control each of these parameters differently, right? So I could call this say hi function with any combination of name and age, and it'll be able to display it on the screen just like that. And that's really where functions can come in handy, right? I can write out a bunch of code inside of this function, I can pass it some information, and it can then use that information to perform its function differently. So the function of this say hi function is to print out some messages onto the screen. But depending on the name and the age that I give it, it's going to do it slightly differently. And that's why, that's how functions can be really powerful. Now, there's one more thing that you can do with functions, which you can have functions return specific values to you. So right now, when I call this function, it's printing stuff out onto the screen. But let's say that I wanted to make a different function. So I'm going to make a really simple function, and it's just going to be called addition. And this is, obviously going to be a function which is going to add two numbers. So now instead of passing in a name and an age, I'm going to pass in num1 and num2. And I don't want to actually write anything out to the document. All I'm going to do in this addition function is I'm going to have it accept two parameters, so two numbers as input, and I'm just going to add those numbers together. So I'm going to pass in like 4 and 5. And inside this function, what we want to do is we want to add num1 plus num2, right? That's what this function would do. It would add those two numbers together. But you'll notice over here, when we're using this addition function, we're not really going to try to print anything out to the screen, right? In other words, like this addition function doesn't care about printing anything to the screen. All it wants to do is add these two numbers. The question becomes, how can I get the result of these two numbers when I call this addition function, right? So for example, if I was to print out the result of this addition function, so I can call this addition function, you'll see that we're not actually going to get a value from this. We're just going to get undefined. But what I can do is I can have this addition function return the result of num1 plus num2, and then we'll be able to get a value from this. So I can use a special word, which is called return. And when I type return, what it's going to do is it's going to return whatever is over here. So in this case, it's going to return the result of num1 plus num2. So now when I call this function, this is going to actually represent a value. So this will represent the value of 4 plus 5. So we're going to get 9. And when I have this function return a value, when I call the function down here, this will now get a value back. So I can say addition 4 or 5, and it'll return to me the result of the addition between those two numbers. So sometimes when you're writing functions, you're not going to want to have them return any information. Like that last function we did, all it had to do was just print some stuff out onto the screen. But in other cases, you're going to want to have a function return some different values. And this is a great way to do that. So another thing I could do, just to sort of illustrate this point, is create a variable. So I could say variable added numbers, and I can set this equal to the addition of, let's say, like 4 and 100, right? So now this added numbers variable is gonna have the value of 4 plus 100, or in other words, it's gonna have the value that this addition function returns. So if I was to print out this added numbers variable, you'll see that we get 104. So that's how you can have functions give you values back. And a lot of times you're gonna want to have functions do specific things, maybe do some like operations and then give you some information back. But other times you're not going to. So if you need information back, you always want to use this return statement, and then whatever you put after this return statement is gonna get returned back to the user. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to Draft Academy to be the first to know when we release new content. Also, we're always looking to improve, so if you have any constructive criticism or questions or anything, leave a comment below. Finally, if you're enjoying Draft Academy and you want to help us grow, head over to draftacademy.com/contribute and invest in our future.